The storm came without mercy, tearing apart the wagon and scattering her life across the wilderness. Alone, bruised and half-buried in snow, she clung to the last breath in her chest, certain death was already reaching for her. But when her eyes opened, it was not death she saw. It was a stranger's face, hardened by survival yet burning with defiance. A man who refused to let her go. Snow drifted across her lashes like ash from a dying fire. The world was silent, buried under white, save for the hiss of the wind tearing through broken pines. Her body was stiff, frozen, her fingers numb claws around the leather strap of what remained of the wagon. Somewhere beneath the snow lay the bodies of horses, her provisions, her chance of survival, all gone in a single night. She tried to move, but her limbs betrayed her, heavy as stone. Breath escaped her lips in broken gasps, each one a struggle. The thought crept in, this is how it ends. Alone, nameless, buried where no one will find her bones, then boots. Snow crunched close. At first she thought it was a hallucination, the echo of some last cruel trick of the mind. But then a shadow loomed over her, tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a heavy wool coat weathered by years of storms. A man. His face was carved by wind and hardship, his eyes sharp beneath the brim of his hat. He knelt without a word, gloved hands brushing snow from her face. She wanted to speak, but her lips trembled uselessly. Instead, a sound escaped, half a plea, half a cry. He studied her as if deciding whether she was worth the effort. Then, with a grunt, he scooped her into his arms. Her head lolled against his chest, the warmth of his coat searing her frozen skin. She wanted to resist, to demand answers, but darkness pulled her under. When she awoke, it was to firelight. The crackle of burning pine filled the air, the smell of smoke and faint venison broth wrapping around her like a blanket. She lay on a bed of furs inside a crude log cabin, walls patched with hides. Her hands trembled as she pushed herself up, vision blurring. He sat across from her, silent, whittling a piece of wood with a long knife. The firelight caught the angles of his face, the scars across his jaw. Where? Her voice broke, rasping like gravel. His eyes lifted to her, dark and unreadable. Alive, he said simply. Alive. The word struck harder than any storm, but alive under his watch. What did that mean? Her heart pounded as silence stretched. Who was he? Why had he saved her? And what price would he demand? Great. Let's dive straight into Chapter 1, Part 2, 600 words. Here we'll peel back the silence, show the first flickers of unease, and end on a note of unresolved tension that pushes into Chapter 2. The cabin walls groaned under the wind, the sound like a living thing prowling outside. She clutched the fur blanket tighter, her eyes darting between the fire and the stranger who had dragged her back from death. He didn't look at her again for some time, as though she wasn't there. The knife whispered against wood, steady, deliberate, each stroke setting her nerves on edge. You should drink. His voice broke the silence like a rifle crack. He nodded toward a tin cup steaming near the fire. Her throat ached with thirst, but suspicion held her still. What if it's poisoned? What if he means to keep me weak? As though reading her thoughts, he leaned forward, took a slow sip from the same cup, and set it back. Then he returned to his carving, indifferent. Her pride warred with her desperation. Finally, she reached for the cup, the warmth of the metal biting her fingers. She sipped, and the broth seared its way down, reviving her like a spark catching dry tinder. You're lucky, he said at last, his gaze fixed on the wood in his hands. Storm like that don't usually leave survivors. Why? Why did you save me? The words slipped out before she could stop them. His knife paused mid-stroke. A shadow crossed his face. Didn't feel right leaving you out there for the wolves. She swallowed hard. That's all? He looked at her then, really looked. His eyes sharp as broken glass, yet haunted, as though he carried a weight heavier than the snow outside. That's all. Silence again. But beneath it something unspoken. Her eyes roamed the cabin, rifle above the door, pelt stacked neatly in the corner, traps hung along the walls. A man who lived off the land. A man who knew how to survive. But alone. Why alone? Do you have a name? She asked softly. Elias. She repeated it under her breath as if testing its weight. Elias. It felt rough, cold, like stone. And you? He asked. Her lips parted, but hesitation caught her tongue. To give her name felt like giving a piece of herself, binding it to this man she barely knew. At last, she whispered it, voice trembling. His brow shifted slightly, something unreadable flickering across his face. A gust of wind slammed against the door, making her flinch. The fire guttered. Elias rose, checked the latch, then stood for a moment staring into the storm as if it held some memory only he could see. Rest, he muttered when he turned back. You'll need strength. For what? His eyes lingered on her, unreadable again. This land doesn't forgive weakness. The words chilled her more than the storm outside. As she lay back, exhaustion pulling at her, questions clawed at her mind. Who was this man truly? Why had he chosen to save her when the wilderness had already claimed so much? And what price would survival demand from her now? The fire popped, sending sparks dancing upward, and in the hollow silence that followed, she realized one truth. She was no longer fighting the storm. She was fighting the man who had dragged her out of it. Elias was already moving. He strapped on his boots with the same precision he had shown the night before, his every motion quiet but deliberate. When he noticed her stirring, his gaze flicked to her, sharp but unreadable. You'll need to work, he said. No greeting, no softness, only command. Her pride bristled. Once not long ago she had known dresses finer than most, meals served on polished plates, laughter in warm parlors. But those days had been torn away, scattered like ash in the wind. Now even her hands trembled as she clutched the blanket tighter. I can barely stand, she whispered. Then you'll stand slower. He tossed her a wool coat, rough but warm, and pushed open the cabin door. A blast of icy air rushed in, biting her skin before she even stepped outside. The wilderness stretched in every direction. Snow draped over endless trees. Sky a cold sheet of steel. Silence so vast it pressed against her chest. Her breath clouded the air as she followed Elias, stumbling. He led her to the frozen stream, a short walk downhill. In his arms he carried a small axe, which he drove into the ice with swift, practiced swings. Chips scattered, glistening like shattered glass. Water, he muttered, nodding to the bucket he had set beside her. Her fingers stiffened against the handle, but she bent down, scooping icy water until the bucket brimmed. The weight dragged at her arms, and every step back to the cabin was a battle against her own weakness. Elias didn't slow for her, didn't offer to carry it. He only glanced back once, ensuring she didn't falter entirely. By the time they reached the cabin, her arms burned and her breath came ragged. She set the bucket down with a sharp clatter, shoulders shaking. You'll toughen, Elias said simply, kneeling to stoke the embers back to life. Or you'll die. Out here, those are the only choices. His bluntness stung, but beneath the words lay something harsher than cruelty. Truth. She sank to the floor, fighting tears she refused to let him see. The day dragged with more tasks. He showed her how to split kindling, how to set snares for rabbits, how to watch for the shift in wind that promised another storm. His lessons were curt, his patience thin, yet in every movement was a strange contradiction. He did not care for her comfort, but he cared enough to keep her alive. That night, as they sat across the fire again, she studied him more closely. The lines etched deep around his eyes, the scar that cut across his jaw, the way his hands never rested even when still, always twitching, always ready, as though expecting an attack. Why do you live out here alone? She asked quietly, unable to keep the question buried. His eyes lifted from the knife in his hand, meeting hers with a look that silenced her breath. Because the world takes everything. Out here it can't take any more. The fire snapped between them, the silence heavier than before. For the first time, she realized his solitude wasn't just choice. It was punishment. The days blurred, marked only by the rhythm of survival. She rose when Elias rose, ate when he allowed, and stumbled through each task with muscles that ached but slowly hardened. The wilderness was merciless, yet within its frozen silence she began to find a strange clarity. Every breath felt earned. Every bite of food tasted like triumph. Still, Elias remained a wall, present yet unreachable. He spoke only of what was necessary, his words clipped, his gaze hard. Yet at times she caught flickers of something else. When her hands bled from splitting wood, he wrapped them silently with strips of cloth. When she nearly slipped carrying water, his hand shot out, steadying her before pulling away as though burned. He gave no thanks, no comfort, but he didn't let her fall. One evening, as twilight settled heavy over the pines, Elias tensed mid-step. His eyes narrowed toward the tree line. "Stay here," he ordered, voice a low growl. Before she could ask, he was gone, moving with quiet speed into the snow-laden woods. She stood by the cabin door, heart pounding, every sound amplified by fear. Minutes stretched long, each one louder than the last. Then she heard it, the sharp crack of a branch followed by a low voice, foreign and rough. Another answered closer. Her stomach dropped. Another answered closer. Her stomach dropped. Elias returned swiftly, face grim. Men hunters or worse. They've seen smoke. Her throat went dry. "What do we do?" "We prepare." He shoved a rifle into her arms, the weight nearly buckling her knees. She had never held such a thing before, and the cold metal bit her palms. I can't. You will." His eyes bored into hers, fierce and unyielding. "If they come, you point and pull. That's it. You want to live? Then fight." The firelight flickered across his scar as he spoke, and for the first time she understood. Survival wasn't a lesson with him. It was a creed. They waited as darkness swallowed the forest. The wind howled, carrying with it the distant murmur of voices. She clutched the rifle, trembling, her breath shallow. Elias crouched by the window, every muscle coiled like a predator ready to strike. The voices drew nearer. She could see shadows moving between the trees, shapes too large and deliberate to be animals. Her heart pounded so violently she thought it might betray them. Then a call, sharp and mocking. "We saw your smoke. Come out or we'll come in." Elias's hand tightened on his rifle. He leaned close, whispering into her ear, his breath hot against her skin. "If it goes wrong, run. Don't look back." She wanted to protest, to demand he promise survival for both of them. But the words froze in her throat. For the first time since the war stole her world, she realized she had something to lose again. Not comfort, not possessions, but the fragile thread of connection tethering her to this man who had refused to let her die. The cabin walls seemed too thin, the night too vast. Every second stretched on a knife's edge. The shadows outside shifted, creeping closer. Elias raised his rifle, his jaw clenched tight. She clutched hers tighter. And in the silence before the storm, she whispered to herself the words she had not dared believe. "I want to live." The door rattled under a sudden knock, harsh and final. The world held its breath. The knock thundered through the cabin, shaking her to her core. Elias didn't move, not at first. His eyes narrowed, the firelight flickering across his face, and his silence pressed heavier than the sound itself. Then, another pound. Louder, more insistent. Elias jerked his chin toward her, his voice barely a whisper. "Stay low. Behind the table." Her legs felt carved from stone, but she obeyed, crouching in the shadows. The rifle in her hands seemed heavier than before, as though it carried the weight of choice itself. The door rattled again, then splintered under a violent kick. 3 men spilled inside, their boots scattering snow across the wooden floor. Their faces were rough, hardened by hunger and cruelty. The stench of sweat and whiskey clung to them like smoke. "Well, well," the tallest sneered, his gaze sweeping over the cabin. "Looks like we found ourselves a cozy little hideout." His eyes locked on Elias. "And company." Elias stood tall, rifle aimed square at the intruder's chest. His voice was iron. "You've made a mistake." The men chuckled, the sound low and cruel. The tallest stepped forward, unafraid. "You're outnumbered. Drop the gun." Her heart slammed against her ribs. Every instinct screamed to run, but her body refused to move. She clutched the rifle tighter, hidden in the corner, every nerve alive with terror. Elias didn't lower his weapon. "This is your last chance, leave." The man's grin widened, revealing broken teeth. "Or what?" The answer came sharp and sudden. Elias fired. The rifle's crack split the silence, echoing through the cabin like thunder. The tallest man stumbled back, clutching his shoulder, his howl of pain cutting through the night. Chaos erupted. Another man lunged toward Elias, knife flashing. Elias swung the butt of his rifle, striking him hard across the jaw. The third rushed in, his boot kicking embers from the fire across the floor. Flames licked at the dry wood, smoke curling instantly. She gasped, frozen, the scene before her blurring into panic. Elias fought with brutal precision, but he was only one man against three. The wounded intruder staggered back toward the door, but the other two pressed hard, snarling, desperate. Then Elias shouted raw and fierce, "Now!" "Shoot!" The world tunneled. Her hands trembled as she lifted the rifle, its weight nearly unbearable. One of the men turned toward her, his eyes catching the firelight. Dark, furious, alive. Her finger squeezed the trigger. The blast shook her to her core. The man crumpled, shock etched on his face as he hit the floor. Smoke curled from the rifle's barrel, her ears ringing, her chest heaving as though she had torn part of herself away. Elias didn't hesitate. He shoved the last man through the door, slamming it shut with his boot before firing once more into the night. Silence fell, heavy and final, broken only by the hiss of smoke from the dying fire. She sat frozen, the rifle still clutched in her hands, the world tilting beneath her. The man she had shot lay motionless at her feet, blood pooling dark against the wooden floor. Elias turned toward her, his chest heaving, sweat and ash streaking his face. His gaze locked onto hers, unflinching. "You lived," he said simply, his voice low, steady. "Because you chose to." Her breath came in ragged gasps. The truth of his words cut deeper than any blade. Because for the first time, survival hadn't been his gift to her. It had been her own. The flames crackled, devouring the wood in hungry snaps. Smoke rose between them, but nothing could veil the weight of what had just bound them together. Blood, survival, and a choice she could never take back. The cabin reeked of smoke and blood. The silence that followed the fight was not peace. It was suffocating, heavy, pressing down on her chest until she thought she might break. She still gripped the rifle, her knuckles white, her body trembling as though the shot had never stopped echoing inside her. The man on the floor lay still, his eyes glassy, his life poured out in a crimson pool spreading toward her boots. Her stomach lurched. She dropped the rifle and stumbled back, pressing a hand to her mouth. A sob ripped from her throat, raw and jagged. Elias moved with purpose, dragging the dead man toward the door. His expression didn't waver, not even as he pushed the body into the snow outside. To him this was routine, a grim necessity. But to her it was the end of something, the end of innocence she hadn't realized she still carried. She collapsed onto the chair, tears streaking her dirt-stained cheeks. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Her mind repeated the moment again and again. The flash, the sound, the man's face in that final heartbeat. "I killed him," she whispered, voice barely audible. Elias turned, his eyes hard but not cruel. "You lived." Her head snapped up, anger sparking through her grief. "Don't you dare say that like it's nothing. I took a life." Her voice cracked, breaking under the weight of her guilt. Elias stepped closer, kneeling until his scarred face was level with hers. His tone cut sharp, but beneath it pulsed something fierce and protective. "Out here, there's no difference. You kill or you die." He would have gutted you without a second thought. "Do you understand?" She shook her head, tears spilling. "I don't want to understand. Wanting doesn't matter." His words were quiet now, steadier. "The wilderness doesn't care what you want. It only cares what you do." Her sobs softened, but the ache inside her deepened. She wanted to hate him for being so cold, but she couldn't. Because part of her knew he was right. She had seen it in the man's eyes before she pulled the trigger. His intent, his hunger, his violence. If she hadn't acted, she would be the one lying lifeless on the floor. The fire sputtered, low and crackling, casting shadows over their faces. Finally, Elias stood, crossing to the table where he poured water into a tin cup. He set it in front of her. "Drink. You'll need your strength." Her hands trembled as she lifted it, but the cool water steadied her, at least for a moment. She swallowed hard, her eyes never leaving his. "Does it ever stop?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "The way it feels after?" Elias's gaze darkened, distant, as though ghosts stirred in the flames. "No, you just learned to carry it." His answer chilled her more than the wind outside. Because in that moment, she realized how much he carried already, how many faces haunted his silence, how many lives his hands had taken, and now, she had joined him in that burden. Hours passed before the smoke cleared enough to breathe easily again. They rebuilt the fire, patched the door, and kept watch through the night. She couldn't sleep. Every time her eyes closed, She saw the man's face frozen in shock, and the way Elias hadn't flinched. But she also remembered something else, his hand on hers as he shoved the rifle toward her. The urgency in his voice, the choice he had given her. He hadn't saved her this time. She had saved herself. That thought, fragile and terrible, became her anchor in the storm. When dawn finally broke, pale and cold, she looked at Elias with new eyes. He was no longer just the man who had dragged her back from death's edge. He was her mirror, broken, scarred, and bound to her now by blood. And whether she wanted it or not, she was part of his world. The snow fell heavier that morning, blanketing the world in a silence that felt almost cruel. The blood outside the cabin had already begun to vanish beneath the white, but no amount of snow could erase the memory of what had happened within those walls. She stood at the threshold, staring into the endless trees, her breath misting in the icy air. Each step she took now felt tethered to a weight she couldn't put down. Yet beneath the weight was a spark, an understanding that she had crossed a line she could never uncross. Elias joined her, rifle slung over his shoulder, eyes scanning the horizon. He said nothing at first, his expression as unreadable as ever. Nothing at first, his expression as unreadable as ever. But the set of his jaw told her what she feared most. This wasn't over. They'll come back, he finally said, his voice low, certain. Men like that don't take a loss kindly. They'll want revenge or supplies or both. Her chest tightened. And if they bring more, then we fight more. Or we move. The thought of leaving the cabin, the only shelter in miles of wilderness, filled her with dread. But the memory of boots stomping across the floorboards, of knives flashing in firelight, was worse. She swallowed hard. Can we make it? Out there? Elias's gaze flicked to her, sharp and assessing. If you keep doing what you did last night, maybe. The words cut, but they also lit something inside her. He wasn't dismissing her anymore. He was measuring her, weighing her against the harshness of the world. And for once, he hadn't already decided she was too weak to survive. That day became a blur of preparation. Elias moved with relentless purpose, forcing her to help gather supplies, bundle furs, and pack dried meat into sacks. Every task was a lesson, every mistake corrected with a sharp word and a sharper look. But beneath his harshness was urgency, a drive that made her realize just how close danger lingered. By afternoon, they were outside the cabin, setting snares and checking tracks. The wilderness was vast, but it was not empty. Twice, Elias stopped abruptly, crouching low, eyes sweeping the snow. He pointed to faint impressions in the frost, boot prints. Her breath caught. They're tracking us. Not yet. Just scouting. They will. His voice hardened, final. We move tomorrow, the weight of it hit her. Tomorrow, the cabin, the only place she had begun to feel the faintest flicker of safety, would be nothing but a memory. The thought hollowed her, yet she saw the truth in his eyes. Staying meant waiting for death. That night, they sat in silence, the fire crackling weakly between them. The cabin walls no longer felt like protection, but like a coffin waiting to be closed. She broke the silence at last, her voice fragile but steady. When the time comes, if they find us again, I don't know if I can do it twice. Elias studied her, his scarred face bathed in shadow. Then for the first time, his voice softened. You will, because you already have. And the second time, it won't feel like falling. It'll feel like choosing. The words both comforted and terrified her, because he was right. A part of her had changed the moment she pulled that trigger, and nothing could undo it. The wind howled outside, rattling the cabin door. She stared into the flames, knowing sleep would not come. Tomorrow they would step into the wilderness together. Tomorrow survival would no longer mean hiding. It would mean running and fighting and never looking back. Dawn broke pale and unforgiving. The fire in the cabin guttered low, little more than ash and smoke, and the air was so cold it bit at her lungs with every breath. Elias rose first, silent as ever, packing their supplies with a speed that told her he hadn't slept at all. She moved slowly, her body heavy from exhaustion, but there was no time to linger. He thrust a bundle of furs into her arms and nodded toward the door. Carry it. Don't drop it. Every scrap matters. The cabin door creaked open, and the world outside swallowed them whole. The snow had deepened overnight, each step sinking past her ankles. The wind whipped sharp across her face, stealing her breath. Still, Elias pressed forward with the certainty of a man who knew the land, his boots cutting a steady path through the white. She followed, her legs trembling with the effort. The wilderness seemed endless now, trees stretching tall and skeletal, branches heavy with ice. Every sound, every crack of a branch, every gust of wind felt like a threat. For hours they trudged in silence, the snow crunching underfoot. Her shoulders ached, her lips cracked, and the cold seeped into her bones. But Elias never slowed. He didn't look back, didn't offer comfort, only set a pace that forced her to keep moving or collapse. At last he stopped, crouching near a cluster of rocks. He scanned the tree line with sharp, wary eyes. Tracks, he muttered, her heart jolted. Them? Maybe could be scouts, could be hunters. Doesn't matter. He pointed to a ridge ahead. We go higher, harder for them to follow. She swallowed her fear and nodded, though every part of her body screamed against climbing. Still, she followed. The ridge was steep, jagged with ice and loose stone. Her boots slipped more than once, her knees scraping raw, but Elias was always just ahead, never helping, never pulling her up, but always there, a steady figure to chase. When at last she reached the top, chest burning, she collapsed into the snow. Elias crouched beside her, his breath fogging in the cold. Get up, don't rest here. We're too exposed. Frustration burst from her before she could stop it. Do you ever stop? Do you ever let yourself feel how impossible this is? His eyes narrowed, and for a moment she thought he might snap. Instead, his voice dropped low, edged with something fierce. If you want to live, you don't get the luxury of impossible. The words stung, but deep down she knew he was right. Gritting her teeth, she pushed herself to her feet, ignoring the ache in her legs. By nightfall, they found a hollow beneath a cluster of pines where the snow had piled high, creating a crude shelter. Elias started a small fire, shielding the flame with his body as the wind howled through the trees. She huddled close, shivering, clutching the furs tighter around her. The firelight danced across his face, carving the scar on his jaw into something harsher, almost inhuman. But when he finally spoke, there was no steel in his voice, only truth. They'll keep coming, he said. The men from last night or others like them. Out here, there's always someone willing to take what's not theirs. If you falter even once, they'll tear everything from you. Her throat tightened. And if I can't keep up? His gaze met hers, unwavering. Then you die. And I keep moving. The words cut deep, but she understood. He wasn't being cruel. He was giving her the only promise this wilderness allowed. No one would carry her but herself. She pulled the furs tighter, staring into the flames. The snowstorm roared around them, and for the first time she realized something that made her shiver harder than the cold. It wasn't the men she feared most. It was the wilderness itself. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the forest hushed and heavy under a blanket of snow so deep it swallowed their boots with every step. The silence pressed against her ears, broken only by the rhythm of their breath and the brittle snap of twigs beneath their weight. Elias moved with that same uncanny precision, scanning the horizon as though danger lived in every shadow. She tried to match his pace, but the snow dragged her down, her legs burning with the effort. Still, she didn't complain. She had learned better. By midday, the sky was a hard, icy blue, the sun weak and distant. Elias suddenly lifted his hand, halting her in place. His body tensed like a bowstring, eyes narrowed at the slope below. Her heart pounded. "What is it?" she whispered, her voice barely carrying in the still air. He crouched low, motioning for her to follow. Together they peered over the ridge. Below, half buried in snow, smoke curled thin from a campfire. 3 men sat hunched around it, rifles leaning against their knees. Their laughter carried faintly upward, coarse and sharp, cutting through the quiet. Her stomach clenched. The ones from before? Elias shook his head, his expression unreadable. No, different men, but no less dangerous. The men below passed a flask between them, voices rising. She caught fragments, talk of stolen horses, a raid on some homestead. Her blood turned cold. These were not men who left survivors. Elias leaned close, his breath warm against her frozen cheek. "We circle wide. Keep low. Don't let them see us." She nodded, clutching the furs tighter. her fingers numb around their weight. Moving carefully, they slipped back from the ridge, weaving through the trees. Every crunch of snow beneath her boots sounded like a shout, every branch that scraped against her dress a threat. Halfway around the slope, her foot caught on a buried root. She stumbled, snow scattering loud as gunfire. Elias spun, his face hard with warning. The laughter below went silent. A voice called out, sharp and suspicious. "Hear that?" Another man answered, his tone rough. "Up there!" Elias cursed under his breath, yanking her by the arm. "Run!" They bolted through the trees, branches whipping at their faces, snow dragging heavy at their legs. Shouts rose behind them, boots pounding, the crack of rifles splitting the air. Bark exploded from a tree trunk inches from her shoulder, showering her with splinters. She gasped, heart hammering. "They're shooting at us. Keep moving." Elias barked, his grip fierce on her wrist as he pulled her through the forest. Another shot rang out, closer this time. She stumbled, nearly falling, but Elias hauled her upright with brutal strength. His jaw was set, his eyes blazing with a fury that chilled her more than the wind. They crashed into a ravine, sliding down the icy slope in a spray of snow. Elias dragged her behind a fallen log, shoving her down as bullets tore through the branches above. Her chest heaved, lungs burning with cold air. She pressed close to the ground, heart racing like a trapped animal. Elias crouched beside her, his rifle steady in his hands, eyes locked on the tree line. The shouts grew louder, closer. The men were hunting them. Elias spoke low, his voice sharp with urgency. "Stay down. Don't move unless I tell you." Her fingers dug into the frozen earth. She wanted to scream, to beg him not to leave her. But she bit it back, the terror choking her silent. A shot cracked through the air and Elias fired back, the sound thunderous in her ears. Smoke curled from the barrel, his face carved in firelight and fury. For the first time since she'd met him, she realized something that sent ice through her veins. Elias wasn't just surviving this wilderness. He was built for it, and the men chasing them might not stand a chance. The cabin door slammed shut behind them, muting the storm's howl to a low moan. Inside, shadows wavered in the firelight, stretching long across the wooden walls. Elias half carried her, his arm locked around her waist, lowering her onto the bed with a tenderness at odds with the blood soaking through his shirt. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps. The wound burned, each heartbeat sending fresh pain through her body. She tried to hold still, to be strong, but when Elias tore away the fabric at her shoulder, she cried out, the sound breaking through the cabin like shattering glass. "Easy," he muttered, his jaw tight, his voice gravel soft. His hands worked quickly, unflinching. He poured liquor over the wound. She jerked, biting down hard on her lip to stifle another scream. His eyes flicked up for a moment, meeting hers. Something unspoken passed there, an apology and yet a command to endure. The smell of iron filled the room, blood, firewood, and whiskey. Elias pressed cloth against the wound, his hand firm. She gripped the blanket beneath her, knuckles white, fighting tears. "You should have let me die out there," she whispered, her voice thin, broken. "You don't owe me this." His hand froze only for a second. Then he resumed, tighter, more deliberate. "Don't ever say that again." Her gaze locked onto him, searching. The scar along his cheek caught the firelight, harsh and unforgiving. But his eyes, dark, storm-heavy, betrayed something else. Something he couldn't hide. Why? She whispered. Elias tied the cloth, securing it. He leaned back, wiping blood from his fingers with a rag, though the stains clung stubbornly. For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the crackle of flames. "Because I've buried enough," he said finally, his voice low, rough-edged. "And I won't bury you." Her chest tightened, not from pain but from the weight of those words. She wanted to ask more, to pry open the iron walls he kept around himself, but the exhaustion dragged at her like chains. She slumped against the pillows, the fight leaving her body. Elias stood pacing near the fire, restless. His broad shoulders cast shifting shadows, his hands flexing as though still gripping the rifle. Every part of him radiated tension, like a man who'd been forced to live too long with ghosts. "You saved me," she murmured, half-conscious. He glanced over his shoulder, his face unreadable. "Sleep. You'll need your strength." Her eyelids grew heavy, her world softening into blur and warmth. But just before sleep took her, she heard him again. his voice barely a whisper, as though spoken to the flames instead of her. "I don't know why I'm fighting so damn hard to keep you alive, but I am." The fire cracked, drowning his confession. When she woke hours later, dawn light sifted weakly through the frost-glazed window. Her shoulder ached, but the bleeding had slowed. Elias sat by the fire, head bowed, his rifle leaning against the wall. For once, he wasn't a fortress of strength. He looked weary, almost broken, his face softened by the pale morning glow. For the first time since the war had torn her world apart, she didn't feel entirely alone, and for the first time, she realized that Elias, scarred, bitter, haunted Elias, needed saving just as much as she did. The storm outside raged on, wind clawing at the cabin walls like a desperate animal. Yet inside, a fragile calm had settled, the kind that made every breath feel louder, every glance heavier. She stirred beneath the quilt, her shoulders stiff with pain. The faint aroma of stew drifted from the fire, mingling with the smoky air. Elias moved with quiet purpose, ladling broth into a tin cup. His movements were rough, practical, but she saw the care in them. The way he tested the heat against his wrist before crossing to her bedside. "Drink," he said simply. Crouching down to help her sit, she took the cup, her fingers brushing his calloused hand. A jolt passed through her, not just from the warmth of the broth, but from the fleeting contact. She met his gaze, and for a moment neither looked away. His eyes, usually guarded, softened just slightly before he pulled back. "It's not poisoned, if that's what you're worried about," he muttered, as though retreating from what had almost passed between them. Despite the ache in her shoulder, she laughed, a small broken sound but real. Elias's lips twitched, as though he fought a smile he refused to show. The stew slid down her throat, easing the hollow ache of hunger. She handed the cup back, watching him as he set it aside. "You keep saving me," she whispered. "Why?" His jaw tightened. He turned toward the fire, his broad back a wall between them. "Don't make it into something it's not." Her heart clenched. "And what do you think it is?" The silence that followed was louder than the storm. Finally, Elias exhaled, the sound heavy with things unsaid. "Survival. That's all this is. Two people stuck in the wilderness trying not to die." She wanted to believe him, but the memory of his hand gripping hers in the snow, the desperation in his voice when he told her not to close her eyes, burned in her mind. "That wasn't just survival. You don't have to pretend with me," she said softly. "I see you, Elias. I see the man who could have walked away but didn't." He turned then, slowly, his face shadowed in firelight. The scar across his cheek caught the glow, sharp against the rugged lines of his face. His eyes met hers, fierce and searching. "And what do you see when you look at me?" Her breath caught. She should have said a stranger, a man bound by circumstance. But the truth slipped free before she could stop it. "I see someone worth trusting." The words landed between them like a spark in dry grass. Elias's breath hitched, though he masked it with a shake of his head. He stepped closer, crouching again by her side, his presence filling the space. "You don't know me," he said, his voice low, rough with warning. "You don't know the things I've done." "Then show me," she whispered. For a heartbeat, the storm outside vanished. All that existed was the heat of the fire, the pulse of her heart, and Elias leaning closer, as though drawn against his will. His hand lifted, hesitating just inches from her face before finally brushing a stray lock of hair from her cheek. The touch was gentle, almost reverent, at odds with the brutality of his world. He pulled back quickly as though burned, his chest rising sharply. "Rest, you'll need your strength." But as he turned away, she caught the flicker in his eyes. The battle he fought not with the wilderness, but with himself, and for the first time, she knew the fight between them would not only be about survival, but about whether they could let themselves feel what neither dared to name. What neither dared to name.